Hi friends, welcome to Techarkit YouTube channel. My name is Ravi. In this video session, we are going to learn and understand what is Git. Let's start by discussing why you would use Git and see what problems we are trying to solve. This chapter isn't so much about how the technical side of Git works, we are going to focus on the concepts. So one of the big reasons to use Git is for version control. Let's paint a scenario. So you are working with code, you have this on your local computer and you're working with a file called code1 and you're making changes, and at one point you think, well, I want to keep track of the change that I just made. I want to try something different, but keep this file as sort of a backup in case I make changes that don't work out. So maybe you create a file called code2 and you start working on that file, and you might reach that point again where you think, I want to make some big changes and I want to make sure that I can go back to this version of the code. So you might make code 3 or code 2b because maybe those changes aren't that big. And I think this is a process most people will be familiar with, where you create code 3 and then at one point you think, okay, we're getting there, this is going to be codefinal, there's just some small cleaning up to do, and then you create codefinal 2 and codefinal and codefinal, now really, this is the one. You can keep going for this for a long time. This is where Git can really help you. So let's move back to the scenario where we started with just one file. So we have code1 and next to that, we now have Git. So in the button we are working in our file explorer, whether we are on Windows or Linux or Mac, this is where our files are stored. And we install Git, which is a separate piece of software on our machine. So where we would first create our version 2 and our version 3, instead of that, when we come to a point where we think we want to keep track of the code as it is at this point, we create a version in Git. We call this a commit. So we commit to Git and say we want to keep track of this specific version. And we keep working in that file called code1, we don't create a new one because we have a backup with Git and we can do this again and again. So when we do it like that, all those old versions are stored in Git and they get a code so we can move back to them. So we can see the whole history of our code, but still keep working in our single file. So we know we'll never be working in the wrong version and our file explorer doesn't get messy like it would before. And we can extend this process because we are now working on our local computer. And this means that while we have a complete version control, we do have a risk of something happening with our computer and us losing all the files that we had. Git can help you with that by using a Git provider. So what we do when we have a Git provider is we can take our complete version history that we also have locally and make sure it's also stored somewhere in the cloud. So if something happens with your device, you still have your code and everything that you have worked on. Now this is a bit of a simplified view of what is actually happening. The important thing here is that you understand the concept. So let's look at another scenario where Git can really help you out. Have you ever tried to share some code with a coworker or with a friend? So, let's say we have a file, code file 01, and we want to make sure that someone else has access to it. Now, you might want to send it through email so you can do it straight to the cloud, but anyone who has ever tried that knows that it will often be caught up in the spam filter. So, you might need to create a new extension and ask the other person to change the extension back. Something like that. It always becomes messy. Yeah, what other options do we have? Do we do USB sticks? That's really a bit old-fashioned at this point. You can do it in SharePoint, but again, there might be issues with spam and it might get messy if people start working in the same file in SharePoint. So while you can use some sort of cloud provider to share those files, you can actually use Git for it. So we had a scenario already where we have a local computer where we are working with our code, and here, we have a friend or coworker who has their own computer and we want the code to get to their computer. And there is our Git provider. So we can add the code to Git provider, and if we make new versions, we can keep adding them to that Git provider. And what we can do is we can make our code public if we want to, or we can add a coworker or friend to the repository we are working in. And at this point, they have access to our code and they can get this code to their computer. So they can either download it directly from the web interface or they can install Git themselves and make their own version control while they are working in this repository. So, this is how Git can help you when you want to share some code with someone else. So how can you use Git to actually collaborate on code? So to work on code together? So let us set it up like this. On the left, we have our own computer. And we are working on the file, and we have added that file to the Git provider, so that is available there. On the right is our coworker, our friend, who also wants to work on this file. So what they can do is use Git and get their own copy of the file. So they can make changes to that file and create a new version. When they're done, they can push this back to the Git provider. And at this stage, we can create a pull, or we can pull the code from the Git provider, and now we have access to that new version of the file. So we can both work on the file and get the newest versions and see what other people have changed. Now of course what could happen is that we both start working on the file at the same time. And the great thing about Git is that often, it will understand how the files interact with each other. And unless they are changed at the same level, it might be able to create a new version based on both our versions. So Git has some intelligence for that. It's not always possible. If we are working at the same levels, we need to manually intervene and check what code we actually want to keep. But overall, Git is very good at checking how two files can be merged into one. Git is very helpful for the process of open source software. Open source means that all the code behind the software is publicly available and you are able to do stuff with it. So you can download it, you can change it for your own use, but what you often also see with open source is that the community works on it. So when someone who uses the code finds that they might need a different feature or they see a bug, they can report it, but they can also change it themselves if they have those skills, of course. And that means that open source software often has some quick development, a lot of features going on. So we already talked about how Git can help you collaborate. So that really helps with open source software. Let's look at a scenario that we saw before where we have the Git provider where our code is stored and we are working on it from two separate computers. Now this works well, but what if we make this a bigger scenario? So let's say there are multiple users that are trying to change that code at once. And you can see this can get messy really quickly. And besides that, the basic code is the source code. So that's running production. So you might not want everyone to be able to make changes to that because something might get broken. So this is where branches come in and we are going to look at the concept of branching here. Let's look back at our scenario where we have two computers. We have our code that is stored in the Git provider and we want to make some changes. But like I said, we don't want to do that in the code itself because that might be running production and a lot of other people are already using it. So we create a branch and this is a copy of the code at the Git provider. So the branch exists side by side with the code that we took it from. It's a direct copy, but nothing we do in the branch will be noticeable in the code itself. And we now take a copy from that branch to our local computer and start making changes. So when we have made changes, we push them back to the Git provider but now to the branch instead of to the main code. And we can do this several times. And when we are ready and we know that we want this change to be part of the main code, they can be merged with each other. Often you do this through a pull request, so other people might do a review before you add it on there. Once you completed that, you can delete the branch that we worked on and this is the new situation. So this situation is exactly the same as it would be if we had worked on that first branch when we started out. But we worked on a separate branch to keep some security and to have our own little workspace in a big project.
Please follow us on social networking sites. One is Facebook. The Facebook page name is @Linux Arkit. You can click on this button here and click like page so that you can follow us on Facebook. The next one is Instagram. Instagram name page name is arkit.co.in. Click on follow button to follow me. And Twitter, if you have any questions on subject line, or if you have anything, you can just tweet me at ravikumar48, so I will reply you most on the tweet back. For anything related, if you want to latest articles on my website, so here is my website details and email address details. You can reach me over here.